When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs.
In all of science, we're looking for a balance between data and theory. You don't have to delude yourself with Iron Age fairy tales.
The same spiritual fulfillment that people find in religion can be found in science by coming to know, if you will, the mind of God.
The real world, as it actually is not evil. It's remarkable. And the way to understand the physical world is to use science.
There is a new wave of reason sweeping across America, Britain, Europe, Australia, South America, the Middle East and Africa. There is a new wave of reason where superstition had a firm hold. Teach a man to reason, think for a lifetime, think for a lifetime.
Well, hi everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Freethought Friday. This is your host, Kieran O'Flynn.
And Robert Coyle. Hey everybody.
And this week, or this month I should say, we're going to be talking about, drugs.
Psychedelics. Drugs and psychedelics.
So this is a completely new topic to me. I know little to nothing about it. So I'm looking forward to learning. I think I'm going to learn from you. This is no implication that Rob is constantly taking drugs, illegal and legal alike. But,
absolutely not.
But I'm looking forward to learning about this. I have certain notions in my head, all of which have been formed primarily, I'd say, by my upbringing and by the culture in which I was raised, which all say drugs are evil. Possibly from the devil, but definitely evil. And no questions should be asked about that. And certainly no connections between evil drugs but nice alcohol and nice cigarettes should ever be made.
I think that's quite a standard. I mean, that would be the attitude that I would have had myself as well. And it's just something in the last 2 to 3 years I came to question. I've done some research and I have completely changed my mind about it. And so I mean, I just want to this whole podcast is for us to explore things, to find out new information about stuff. And so what I'm hoping happens tonight is that I convince you that it may be worth your while to do some investigation, not taking anything, but to just go find out some more information. I'll be surprised, but I'm open to the fact that I may come away from this going, oh, I was wrong. And actually you're correct, Kieran, and I hadn't thought about it from that point of view. But I'll be honest, that's a minority outcome as far as I'm concerned at this point.
So the longitudinal meter is probably going to be more on my side this time.
I hope so. Firstly, it's not that I have a vested interest, it's that I think either that or like I'm really shit at making arguments, right? In which case I've just been completely like, I'll believe anything you say, man. And the stuff that I've read. So what I wanted to do is I've got some kind of points laid out and then we can take it from a discussion if that's okay with you.
Brilliant.
Okay, the two things that I want to first put on the table is that first of all, there is no judgment I'm not going to make any judgments as to what is happening when you take psychedelics. Some people say it's spiritual, some people say it's metaphysical. I have no idea, and I have no idea, and we're going to discuss that later on. So that's the first thing, which is I am not suggesting that what people say happens is actually what is happening, i.e. in this universe.
Right.
But it feels the same, but we're going to get to that. But the first thing I want to talk about is actually this word drugs.
Right.
Okay, because drugs is like sport, right? And at one end of sport, you've got lawn green bowling, right? Where genteel Mr. Kipling cake eating Southern English people from last summer wine roll bowls across a green. Right. Fine, no one would say there's anything dangerous about that sport. And at the other end, you have Russian roulette.
Yes.
Okay, so sport covers all of those things. And drugs covers everything from aspirin to heroin.
Right.
Okay. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to talk about I want to separate out what appear to be drugs that are primarily positive, i.e. they have a net benefit effect in use on the person using them,
Right.
the people around the people using them, and society in general, versus drugs that have a net negative effect on the person using them, the people around the person using them, and society in general.
Right.
And the way that governments have approached this before is in what they call the scheduling route. And what they do is they set up various schedules of different types of drugs. I will talk more about the American one because that seems to be more germane. And certainly it seems, from what I can see, the English and the Irish drug laws are based off the same thing. So Schedule 1, or like a controlled substance, it might be how they use it in England,
Right.
is something that is harmful to the individual, harmful to society, and has no medicinal benefit whatsoever. And that's a very important distinction, because literally what the government has said is, we know enough about this substance now to never have to bother doing research on it, because, and especially in America, where most of our medical stuff kind of filters through. Right? Let's just deal with America before anywhere else.
Sure.
Because if America changes its mind radically about stuff, it filters across the rest of the
certainly the Western Hemisphere.
the Western ones. Okay.
Yeah.
So in America, they have these Schedule 1 drugs, and they are dangerous to the person, dangerous to society, no medicinal benefit. We don't need to do any more research.
Right.
So, for instance, heroin falls into that. I'm not aware of anybody who's walking around going, have we considered the clinical applications of raw heroin?
Right.
You can look around the streets of any major city in the world and you can see what heroin does to people. Okay? It is incredibly addictive. It is incredibly dangerous to the individual. That individual will frequently lose all of their social capital, their job, their house, their friends, their support structure, and can frequently end up destitute. Right. Okay, and victim to the worst pariahs of this society and the people who prey on those unfortunate individuals. So I'm not classing that. I would class crack cocaine in there, methamphetamine in there, these opiates, unrefined opiates, and very strong amphetamines.
Right.
There's another class of drugs, and we're going to call these the psychedelic drugs.
Right.
And these drugs operate primarily, as far as I'm aware, and again, I may be misinformed about this, outside of the dopamine system.
Right.
And they rely more on the serotonin system.
Serotonin, that's that chemical
They're
in your
both
brain?
neurotransmitters. Now, this is where like my marketing background really informs my biochemistry, right? Okay. So,
By the end of October, I think I'm going to have to know all of this. So thank you. This is like me cramming for my first exam.
Nice.
Yeah.
My understanding is this: dopamine and serotonin are both neurotransmitters. So what they do is they're the to say they're the language of the workings of your brain. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but it's how I understand it. So they're like the machine code, right, of your brain. They're not the software. They're not the user interface. They're the stuff that's going on in the background. They're how your brain
actually
does it, and how people take. They may be how your brain makes your mind. That might be what they do.
Yeah,
and we don't know. And I don't know enough, and no one does to say yay or nay.
Yeah,
right?
But that's what that's our best.
Exactly. And from what I understand is this: if you have any substance that activates the dopamine system more than the serotonin system, that substance is by definition more addictive.
Right.
Than the alternative substance. This is my understanding, that all addiction is based on manipulation and interaction with the dopamine system. Anything that primarily interacts with the serotonin system has either got a greatly reduced addiction profile or zero addiction profile. Okay? And why it may have a reduced one is there may be dopamine in it, but the primary active ingredient is a serotonin one, and we're going to deal with that. So, psychedelics was a word coined in the 1950s, I think, by, I forget the guy's name, but he was corresponding with Aldous Huxley. People can look this up. We'll provide it in notes. So it's a relatively new thing. LSD was discovered in 1943 by a bloke in Switzerland by mistake, doing research into mold that grew on corn that had been used as a herbal remedy in kind of the people where that corn was indigenous in their antiquity. So psychedelics, I'm going to suggest, are a different form of drug. So what we can do is, in the word drugs, we can talk about narcotics, and in narcotics, let's talk about the addictive ones. Let's talk about heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, the nasty ones, okay? There's another type of drug, and we'll call them psychedelics. Now, all of these drugs are also Schedule 1, and this is an interesting point.
So just to be clear, so there is no distinction, at least that you see in Schedule 1 for psychedelics or narcotics.
For instance, cannabis is considered as dangerous as heroin.
Right.
Now that's just ludicrous. Like, that is patently ludicrous.
Because even just using your original kind of benchmark
exactly.
or a base metric of how
danger to the person.
Right.
Addictive. First of all, addictive. How addictive is it? Because because it can't become dangerous until it gets you addicted. Right? So the first thing is, how addictive is it? Well, cannabis has got somewhere between 1/3 to 1/10 of the addiction profile of nicotine.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And we have no problem selling it
exactly.
in vending machines.
Right. And then there's the danger to the individual. There are no cases that I've been able to find in the history of cannabis use, which predates civilization, right, where someone's died from cannabis overdose. It appears that it's impossible to do it. Maybe someone has found that some dude smoked 1 kilogram of the stuff. Fine.
I would imagine if you smoke 1 kilogram of anything,
absolutely,
you're probably not going to be
Jim
able to do
Fitz died from doing too much jogging. Too much of anything is too much. The clue is in the word TOO. Okay. Right, and then there's the danger to society. Well, if you're not addicted and it's not causing you any harm, it's hardly going to cause anything else.
Right.
There's studies now that absolutely have shown that there is some form of a correlation, maybe not a causation link, but a correlation between cannabis use and schizophrenia.
Right.
But there appears to be some discussion as to actually whether the mechanism might be working in the reverse direction, whereby if you have a predisposition towards schizophrenia, you may react more strongly towards cannabis than someone without that, so therefore you seek cannabis out. So there's an underlying medical condition driving this behavior, much the same as people like chronic alcoholics talk about the minute they taste the first mouthful of alcohol, and they talk about an epiphany-like moment.
Yeah, and there's certainly I don't know enough about this, so I'm sure we can find out more research on it. But there seems to be a familial link. I don't know if I should say genetic link, but there seems to be a familial link for predisposition towards, as you said, chronic alcoholism.
Yeah.
So again, we could consider, okay, well, there may be a genetic predisposition towards maybe less mild reactions towards something like that.
Now, while we're talking, because one of the major negative side effects of any drugs, and I'm using drugs now in the narcotic plus psychedelic in the all-encompassing sense, is addiction. Right. Okay, and this is, I think, what most people are scared of. Most people would have a negative attitude towards drugs, I think, because of the perceived scale of danger involved and the easiness with which you can become addicted to that and therefore lose control, and you're instantly going to become harmed. And I think that strikes me as that's the common sense attitude that most people have towards drugs. I don't want to try them because I don't want to get addicted.
I have this this particular I don't know if you want to call it pathology or consideration in relation to alcohol. So I drink very little alcohol.
Right.
Up until I was 23, I drank no alcohol. And I made particular excuses for that. I was a pioneer, so it was religious, and then when I became Buddhist, it was religious. And then when I no longer had an excuse, I kind of had to face up it was a fear element. It was most definitely a fear element. A fear of losing control and being someone I definitely didn't want to be. And I'm not talking about maybe slightly obnoxious or bumping into people, but actually because I certainly from my upbringing I knew that there was a history of alcoholism in both my parents' families.
Gotcha.
Not with them. In fact, what rubbed off on them was my dad has half a small glass of wine once a week and 1 beer at Christmas, and my mum has never touched alcohol in her life. So that certainly it was important to me, not so much the rest of my family. But when I look at it honestly, it is that they're drugs. I could become addicted. It could be harmful. And so I took an extreme position at the time, and to a certain extent I still have that. So I can definitely sympathize with that.
So this is good. So we're getting to a playing field. So so we have this addiction profile, which to most people is the reason not to take drugs. It's this lack of control, and I think as conscious, self-conscious beings, we are self-aware beings. We want to feel like we're in control of our own decisions. And I know when I see someone who's been ravaged by heroin addiction in town, I feel an instant repulsion and revulsion, and I'm ashamed of that. But I look at this this poor human being, and they have been rendered in my mind less than human by what this drug has done to them, i.e. it has reduced their choices. I have a number of choices available to me. They have a finite and lesser number of choices available to them because of their addiction to this substance. I'm not suggesting they are less than human. What I'm saying is this is how I process
absolutely,
it. Okay.
Yeah,
and I'm
have a
scared,
similar,
right?
Yeah.
And I look at them, and I've only ever seen somebody shooting heroin once, and it just kind of turned my stomach. It's to see someone completely in thrall to a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's dehumanizing. Mm-hmm. It is dehumanizing to see a human being as a slave to a thing.
Yeah.
Right? And it's terrifying. So I completely understand. So I want to talk about a specific subset. I want to talk about psychedelics. I want to talk about a couple of drugs within that compound. I want to talk about LSD. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about MDMA. I want to talk about psilocybin, and I want to talk about DMT. Okay, now all of these 4 drugs are all Schedule 1 drugs. It is illegal to have them, possess them in this jurisdiction.
Right.
It is the same legally as if you've got heroin.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So anytime I'll say now, outside of this territory, outside of this jurisdiction, I have taken DMT twice.
Right.
Okay? That is the only hallucinogenic I have taken. I have taken cannabis occasionally. Nothing serious, nothing particularly regularly, but it is something that I have partook of in the past, and I inhaled and I enjoyed it an awful lot. Okay.
Can I just pause you? I'm sorry, while you're in the flow, just for to clarify for my own ignorance. Hallucinogens and psychedelics are these
the same? Sorry, it's an interchangeable world. It's an interchangeable world, and they are characterized by, and most people wouldn't consider cannabis an hallucinogenic, but it is.
Right.
It's just when people talk about hallucinogenics, I think the image that they get in their mind is crazy visuals. It's the hippies, it's 1968, it's the Sgt. Pepper's, it's the Yellow Submarine, it's images that seem cartoonish, they look like TV special effects. And that's one aspect of them, and I want to talk about that as well later on. But there's another aspect of them, which is the effect. I'm going to jump around here, right? I had a structure, but I'm going to jump around here, right?
Okay.
I had never experienced an hallucination until I took DMT. And this was relatively recent in the last couple of years. So that my first time taking hallucinogenics in my late 30s. And I had this stuff. And DMT is the base molecule to which all other hallucinogenics devolve inside the body.
Right.
Okay? It is, it's very close to serotonin.
Right.
And in fact, DMT, dimethyltryptophan, occurs naturally in, as far as we're aware, every living organism on the planet.
Right. Okay.
Right?
So
okay.
it's
once you get to plant life,
it's not a controlled substance.
It's not a controlled substance. It actually is a neurotransmitter.
Right.
So here's the point. If I am found with a bit of DMT in my pocket, okay, that's illegal. The fact is my brain is swimming in the stuff already It's completely to the point, right? So in one way, the drug law has made a neurotransmitter illegal. This would be the equivalent of making adrenaline illegal, or testosterone illegal, or serotonin illegal. Okay? So first of all, there's a question mark over the validity for any law that is making a bit of us that is inherent, that cannot be taken away from us.
Yes.
Illegal.
Yes.
So we're all criminals. It's kind of like narcotic original sin. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of ludicrous when you see it.
Yeah.
But again, with everything else, and I'm not suggesting we repeal all of our drug laws. What I'm suggesting is that there are certain substances that create effects in humans that are interesting enough that warrant some further investigation. That is my entire point here. So I take DMT the first time, and it's a very fast acting thing because your body makes it. So basically you're in and you're out 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes.
Right.
Okay, so the entire thing from in, and I was smoking it, so from smoke, first mouthful in to feeling like reality had fully returned to normality, approximately 12 to 15 minutes. Okay, the peak of it hits after about 90 seconds, and the peak of it would be 2 to 3 to 4 minutes, maximum. Okay, and then you feel yourself return to reality. Now this is the point that I wasn't prepared for. First of all, I wasn't prepared for auditory hallucinations, because I thought it's all going to be visual.
Auditory hallucinations, yes, that's interesting. Okay.
The second point was this. I didn't. DMT has got quite a reputation for being a drug that you can, and I'm using air quotes here, break through into this alternate reality.
Right.
I didn't take enough of it. I did not break through. I would have been at what was called first stage, or what is called the chrysanthemum stage of DMT. If the only way I've been able to explain this to people is as following: if you were to lay out my memory of the day that I took it, and you were to literally replay my memories, and you were to replay the light entering my optic nerve, you would find that there is an absolute match. What my eyes were seeing is what my brain was perceiving. Okay? Up until the point where I take DMT. At this point now, the film strip representing what my eyes are seeing goes completely dark. And the film strip that is recording what is happening in my visual cortex, or wherever this stuff happened that I saw, just goes haywire. There is no analogy for this in reality. So I'm going to describe to you what this felt like and what I saw. Okay? I am not ascribing meaning. Okay? And I cannot emphasize this enough. Okay? Because an awful lot of people talk about this, and they talk about it in a spiritual sense, as if just to feel a sensation means that it is actually true. I am not saying that is the case. I'm not saying that my feelings were a reaction to a physical reality that I was witness to. I'm saying this is what happened, and if we were to replay the film strips, you'd see what I meant. So what happens is you take it, you close your eyes. I saw what looks very similar to the entering into the video game sequence in the original Tron movie, not the new one, but the original one, where you have these neon fireflies making geometric patterns. Okay, very, very fast, very, very vivid, like little lightsaber tips moving through, changing color. Beautiful, just beautiful, just wow. Okay.
I'm sorry. Sure.
Interrupt.
I don't want to interrupt, but I'm actually quite surprised that you remember so much of this vividly. I don't know why. I would presuppose that you would have lost your memory of this.
This is the surprising thing.
Yeah. So that you're describing it in this detail is fascinating to me. So sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay. And here's the point. At no point did I lose my consciousness, my sense of self, which apparently is the fingerprint of when you break through. Apparently, people who break through, again, air quotes. I don't know. I'm just going on what they say. I never experienced it myself. You lose a sense of yourself. I was very much aware that what there was an essential me experiencing this. There was a me stripped of it's hard to say. There was a me stripped of my subconscious. There was only the voice inside my head that is my voice. There was nothing else.
Yeah, there wasn't the other voices.
Exactly.
I have many of these.
I have three. Yeah. I have three. I have the film strip. I have the commentary, of which I call the director's commentary. The director just hates me.
Oh yeah.
Not like me.
I have a self-loathing director.
Exactly. And then I have me.
Yeah, and then there's me. Yeah. Which I think is a combination probably of the two. But okay, so that's interesting. So you just had.
So there was me. The other two are gone.
Okay, interesting.
This is what it felt like. So I'm going to relay this to you as if it happened, as if this physically happened. So in my eyes, off to the left, I see these little fireflies, these neon fireflies, tracing geometric shapes, and they have a slight afterglow as if someone's using a laser pen on a long exposure movie. So it's not that they draw them and they stay there permanently. There's a little bit of a glow in the groove in the space in which they've moved. There is no sense of depth. There is no sense of up or down. It's just there. Okay? Which is it was off to my left. It was in the left of my visual field. Beyond that, I cannot say anything else. That was replaced extremely quickly by. And this looked as real to me as you look now. Okay? If you've seen the water tentacle from The Abyss.
Yes.
Right, so I want you to imagine the shape of the water tentacle from The Abyss. So essentially an undulating, absolutely organic tentacle. Right? That seemed infused with sentience. It seemed to know what it was. There was an overriding feeling inside me. This thing was a thing.
And it knew what it was.
It wasn't a mountain. It wasn't a crazy thing. It was a sentient thing. It appeared to be made out of. Gold Rubik's cubes, gold-colored Rubik's cubes, where every every facet, every individual cube
Yeah.
was spinning within itself, and then large groups of them were spinning as a larger group, but the whole thing was maintaining the shape, a tenticular shape.
Right.
So there was an incredible amount of movement within the overall shape of this tentacle that seemed to coil and corkscrew itself and get closer and closer and closer to me. Originally, and this is, and I have to step sideways out of this now. When I first took this, because I took it twice in the same day, and I saw the same thing twice, and so my rational brain, which at no point left me during any of the experience, said, this is frame dragging. What it was where I was sitting, there was a unit which had stained glass in it.
Right.
And because I saw exactly the same thing behave exactly the same way twice,
right.
I assumed that what was happening was that the last image my eyes had seen had somehow, through the mechanism of the DMT, been held onto in my visual cortex, that was tied into the rapid eye movement my eyes were going, and what was happening is my visual cortex was literally just relaying the same image over itself as my eyes moved.
Right.
And I stayed having that belief for nearly a year, that that's actually what happened.
Right.
Until I heard someone else describe what they had in DMT, and they weren't in the room that I was in, and they had exactly the same. And I went, now that makes things very interesting indeed.
I was going to ask that, but I had actually dismissed the idea before I even got to a point of asking, have people taking this, in particular, this drug, experienced the same or similar things? And so you're saying yes, now, they have actually.
What I've found in reading up about this is that people talk, there seems to be general consistencies between people's experiences. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I'm not that impressed with general commonalities.
Yeah.
And these are found across all of these, quasi-scientific, hopefully not pseudoscientific.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're pseudoscientific. Excuse me. These experiences. So for a year, I thought that's what I'd seen. That this was just a mechanism whereby this drug was activating the visual cortex inside my mind, and was basically feeding off of the last visual input and relaying it, creating this three-dimensional space.
Right.
Until I was watching a podcast with a comedian who I greatly admire, a guy called Joe Rogan, and Rogan described his experience with DMT. And up until this description, he'd always described the further on section, the breaking through section.
Right.
This was when he described what happened at the start. And he said, and it was tumbling and undulating, and it was bumblebee colour, gold and black, and my blood went, wow, that's exactly what I saw. That is exactly what I saw, because apart from the gold, the other great colour is black, and it's black and gold, and it is unmistakably black and gold. So, let's go back in.
Fascinating.
So, I'm watching this thing form around me, and I can't say where it formed from. It's just, all of a sudden, it's there.
It's there, right.
And then I perceive it getting closer to me. It starts to move in closer to me. Now, when I first see it, I think it's maybe about the size of my arm. Right. That it's a tentacle about the size of my arm. So it's like a big snake, for want of a better thing. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And you mean
bigger.
fatter?
It gets closer.
Oh, closer.
So it starts to fill my field of vision.
Oh, right.
That my last memory, and I'm dragging this out of my mind, my last memory is looking at, it's so close to me now that one of the facets of one of the Rubik's Cubes, of which this thing is made up of billions,
right,
is bigger than my entire field of vision.
Right.
One of them.
One facet of one of the cubes.
So this thing is, if you were saying, if this is real, this is like the scene at the start of that last Star Wars movie for the Xbox, where the Star Destroyer, where the Jedi guy brings the Star Destroyer and it starts to scoot towards him, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's this great image of this tiny figure with the front of this mountain-sized thing. And that's what I felt like.
Right.
The scale difference in no way caused me any worry.
Yeah, because I mean, what you described to me now, and kind of, I was always stepping back as you were describing. I was like, oh.
And this was it. And what I found, and actually what I felt was, I felt close to it.
Right.
I felt like there was a membrane between me and it.
Right.
And my hands were down by my side. I remember that very, very clearly. And I remember craning up to try and touch it with my face.
Right.
It didn't happen. Okay, I didn't have that sensation.
Right.
I opened my eyes. Everything returns to normal after a while. And then there's some very, very pleasant visual hallucinations in terms of the vividness of colours. I completely understand now why the 60s, the art of the 60s looked that way. It's because it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And the classic thing of, it was a green, it was the essence of green. I now understand what that meant. When you look around, you see, it's like someone's dialed up the contrast within you.
Yes,
What I found really disconcerting about this was there was no sensation. Before I'd taken this, I thought that when you hallucinated, if you were self-conscious aware enough, you could perceive the lens that the drug was giving you.
Right.
So I could be looking at something and hallucinating, it was crazy, but I could perceive that this is the hallucination. It feels somehow...
Almost as if you were outside of the television set, watching the television, but you were all part of the one thing.
Exactly. This isn't... I was completely not ready for the fact of it feels real.
Yeah.
Like, it feels as real as sitting down here does. There was no sensation of this is not like a normal sensation. This feels exactly the same way.
Because it's interesting. I like going to plays, but I don't go that often. And one of the reasons why I don't is because it almost feels too real for me. I like the movies because there's a barrier. That barrier is this projected screen, and that there's that thing of almost jumping into the screen, but you can't do it. And knowledge of that separates you in many ways. It's psychologically, emotionally, and no matter how much auditory or visual sensory information is thrown at you, you're aware. You're
aware of the wall.
You're aware of the wall, absolutely. And so, certainly, I would think that that's the way, as you just described it there, I would have perceived, or I would have thought
you would
before.
Perceive the wall.
Yeah, that I would perceive the wall.
You would perceive that I'm on this side.
So that's what you thought too, yeah.
I thought that going into it, and it really doesn't feel it.
That's interesting.
Now, there was one sensation I found very interesting, which was, I was aware that the imagery I was seeing, and I'm using air quotes with seeing again because my eyes were closed, was not being generated by my eyes.
Right.
That this was happening inside my head. Right? That this was not because I would open my eyes and there would be the room around me and I would close my eyes and I would be right back there again. There was an absolute sensation. I could feel the gap between where these images were being generated and the front of my face where my eyes are.
Right.
I was very aware of that. I could feel the 2 or 3 inches.
Right? As we can experience the gap between you and I sitting here at this table. So it felt that real.
It felt
with your eyes closed.
With my eyes closed.
There's no way I can imagine that. And with maybe the exception of a dream.
And it's not like a dream.
But a dream never feels real. Well, certainly it never feels real to me. So
a dream has snatches of relevance and snatches, but also a dream is very recognizable. A dream, I've never come across something in a dream and not understood what it was. You may not understand why it's there, or you may go, well, in my dream, my mother was a bowl of cornflakes, but she was my mother, but she was a bowl of cornflakes, but she was my mother.
And I understand these things.
And you get that.
But not spinning Rubik's Cube tentacles.
Rubik's Cube golden bumblebee spinning Rubik's Cube tentacles made of eyes. I've never had that dream. That's never happened.
Because actually, I was going to ask, because I find dreams fascinating. Not in they're telling me a little bit about myself. More just I'm fascinated about what the brain can do when apparently shut off, but not actually. But I'm at least intellectually aware that if I picked out a face, or I picked out a name, or I picked out something that I think I've never seen before, I'm pretty confident, even though I can't recall it in my memory, that I'm sure it is a memory fragment somewhere in there, and it's been pulled out and it's been used in that dream sequence.
There seems to be I think there's a subjectivity to dreams. They feel like they've been made from bits of you. You feel familiar. It's my dream.
In fact, I think if you weren't, if in fact it was that like Inception, where you could enter other people's dreams. That lack of familiarity, the foreign element in your mind would probably create that kind of a defense mechanism that
Absolutely.
they talk about.
I think you would feel ill at home.
Ill at
not
home,
at home.
yes. Something's wrong
Absolutely.
here. So when you were describing Bumblebee Tentacle Arm with the Rubik's Cubes, before you told me about what your then explanation that you thought was the explanation, I was kind of thinking, I wonder, maybe he saw something like this when he was younger or in a picture or whatever else, and then you said, you saw the stained glass window, and then you thought it was that. Yeah. So that thought did enter my head, but then when you said Joe Rogan described something similar, I'm equally fascinated about this.
And this.
Either way,
I know.
And in no case do I think this is supernatural, but I think in either way I think this is fascinating, because it could mean that maybe the chemical works in the exact same way on every single brain.
And this is, so let us jump ahead a bit and say this, right? Psychedelic drugs posit, from what I can see, two questions.
Right.
Either A, this is an underlying mechanics of the workings of the brain, or it's something else.
Right. Yeah.
But it's only one of the two of them.
Either possibility is fascinating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Either way, we either find an awful lot out about the human brain,
or we find a little bit more out about our perceived reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
but still scientific questions, of course. So.
Exactly. So, so where was I? Oh, lights on. Good. Right. Okay. So after seeing Joe Rogan, I got a message. Right. I heard, and again, at no point did I lose consciousness. Excuse me. Or did I lose my sense of self? A fragment of a song. Right. I had a specific, and I'm not going to reveal this here. I had it would be too personal. I had a specific worry at the time.
Right.
And a fragment of a song by a band that we happened to be listening to at the time when I took the DMT, replayed while I was in it.
Right.
And I was so aware that when I heard this phrase, and it was repeated 4 times. It's repeated twice in the specific song, but it was repeated 4 times.
In your experience of it.
3 words repeated 4 times. Like a perfect reproduction of how it sounds in the song, with a little bit of extra echo on it.
Right.
And I actually turned, not turned, but it did seem to be coming from my left-hand side, right? Whereas the water tentacle bumblebee thing was in front of me.
Yeah.
And I actually said, you brought me all the way here to tell me that. Like, really? That's because this was so on the nose, it was so material, it was not in any way spiritual, it was functional. It'd be like if you went, maybe if you found The Secret of Life,
right,
and it was like how to peel a potato, it's like it'd be so mundane. I was just
42.
Exactly. I was so disappointed, and so I just put it down to that was just me. That was, again, this was auditory leech. This was input. When I heard the Joe Rogan thing, I went, now that's interesting. I went, I must go back and watch the video, because I videoed myself doing this because
fascinating.
Yes,
okay.
Because I wanted to see, did it happen?
Right.
That song doesn't play
at all.
Now the album is playing.
Right,
but it is absolutely, but not that song. And I went, now that's very interesting. This is where I really want to get to in the discussion. That those 3 words were exactly what I needed to hear. Right.
Okay.
And I can only say that. They were exactly what I needed to hear at that time. Now so I had dismissed the entire experience for a year, essentially. Right. And I thought, I just heard those words, my psyche plucked those 3 words out from the stream of stuff coming through my ears and just replayed them to me. Yes, was what I needed to hear, but fine.
Yeah.
Let's get on with it.
Yeah. The flying spaghetti monster isn't touching you with this noodly
Exactly. But then it turns out that music wasn't playing. So again, I'm left with a question, which was, my subconscious pulled the precise 3 words I needed to hear.
Right.
And I find that very interesting. Very interesting. So that's the background to my personal psychedelic experience. Now let's talk about it in general.
Right.
These drugs, and specifically we'll talk about psilocybin, magic mushrooms as everybody would know them. DMT.
Sorry, and again I'm interrupting you, but just before we move on, because you were talking about this experience and that you had recorded this experience, I believe, I don't know if you're aware, there's an atheist called Dusty Smith.
Right.
He has a YouTube channel called Cult of Dusty.
Okay.
he's from. I think he's definitely from the south. I think he's from Louisiana.
Yeah.
He's recently moved to one of the states that has legalized use of cannabis and other narcotics, psychedelics.
Yeah.
I'm learning something.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But because you mentioned that you recorded it and that was an interesting experience, I recently watched his recording, and I think it is DMT. I couldn't remember the drug,
very quick,
but I think it is. It was about 5 to 7 minutes.
That'd be about right.
He kind of inhales it, and he tries to talk through it. He has his eyes open through it, and he's relatively lucid throughout most of it. Some parts he's a little less. But it's fascinating, and it's fascinating that he recorded himself do it and then published it on YouTube. So it's definitely, given the experience that you've just described, we'll most definitely include that in the links.
Great.
So that people can maybe get a sense, because as you were describing your experience, I was kind of recalling some of those bits of the video, but I'm sure you don't want to put your video on YouTube. So we'll definitely put a link to Dusty. But so
excellent.
So you're talking about the general now, the general experience.
Right. So let's move out from that. And what I'm particularly interested in, and this is where research is probably too fancy a word for it, but this is where what I've learned has all kind of focused down into a single point. The traditional usage of these substances, psilocybin in the form of magic mushrooms that grow pretty much, as far as I'm aware, all over the planet, right? And you've got THC in cannabis, which grows pretty much all over the planet. Okay, you've got DMT, which occurs in every living being, and which is used by tribes in the Amazon in the form of ayahuasca. And how they came across ayahuasca, again, is an interesting story. And then finally MDMA, the street name of which is ecstasy.
Right.
So there's 4 of those, and I would my argument is that those 4 substances need to be treated differently.
Right.
They are worthy of a lot of medical research to find out what they can do and what potentialities that they can do, as opposed to being Schedule 1 or else a new form of Schedule 1 whereby they can be experimented with. I don't know.
Right.
I'm not a legal expert.
Yeah.
But that would be certain. I would like to see that happen. So if we look back through history, these substances were never used, from what we can see, in recreational sense. They were used in ceremonial sense in what would have been the religion of the tribe at the day. Psilocybin mushrooms, there have been many theories put forward that after Terence McKenna has got a theory called the stoned ape, which was that as the temperature changed in parts of Africa and forest land gave way to savanna land, and what we had is our ancestors who were apes came down from the trees and were now walking across savanna, and what happened now is that what they call ruminant creatures moved in, so cows and creatures with kind of multiple stomachs who would eat an awful lot of the grass and would then shit, and mushrooms grow in the shit. So all of a sudden you've got apes now, for the first time in their history, in close proximity to magic mushrooms, to psilocybin, this specific thing. They start to eat it, and what you know, maybe that explains the mystery, which is how come Homo sapiens' brain doubled in size over 2 million years, because no one has a reason why. Now, and this is where no one knows the answer to this. This is merely a theory. This theory doesn't have as much evidence behind it as the theory of gravity,
right?
Or evolution. It is a theory,
right?
What I want to, I'm trying to like, where do I want to go on this next? The point is that these substances cause your consciousness to be altered,
right?
In a way that I'm not aware any other substances do. One of the feelings that these substances do is they create what's called a unifying feeling.
Okay.
There is a tremendous sense, and I can only talk about DMT and cannabis. There is a tremendous sense when on DMT and on cannabis at a certain point that you are part of something larger.
Right.
There's a lovely, and we're going to put a link onto it at the end of this, from a program called From Neurons to Nirvana, and one of the people describes it as the sensation that we are not islands craning across the ocean that divides us to understand each other. Rather, we are pinnacles on a continent that joins underneath the water.
Okay,
now I find that spectacularly beautiful.
That's very, very poetic.
Like, it's just gorgeous, right?
Yeah.
And that's the sensation. Right. That is the sensation. There was a tremendous feeling at one point. I remember looking at a table and going, wow, the difference between that table and me is kind of just reorganization.
Yes.
If you boil it down to an atomic level, if you were able to see the quarks, right?
Of course, you have a better sense of fashion than the
Yes,
table.
this is a good table.
So yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, you're talking
But
about good.
At a
good
subatomic level, could you tell a bit of me from a bit of the table?
Table, yeah.
And not when it's just carbons.
No.
So literally, so you're kind of going. So it's literally just the reorganization of stuff is the explanatory difference between me and a table. That's now I know there's lots of other stuff.
Yeah,
right?
but
it does boil down to that.
I mean, I certainly think this is the kind of spirituality of which Carl Sagan spoke so eloquently. And it's certainly I would imagine a very limited sense of this compared to maybe with psychedelic experience of it. But when I watch waves, I was watching some ripples in a lake yesterday in Glendalough, or I remember relatively recently going down walking by the sea on the beach in Cortown and just watching the water and the waves mix and remix and understanding. This is why I love when Carl Sagan talks about this, understanding the physical connectedness of that, and then the connectedness of that with me, and the connectedness of that with the sun, and the connectedness of me with the sun and stars and whatever, does certainly give me that sense, and it's a very, very big sense, and it certainly puts any of the cultural compartments or cultural walls that either I willfully throw up or have been thrust upon me that I then throw up out of reaction with other human beings. It pulls them down very, very quickly.
Yes.
At least for a short while, if not always, and then unfortunately sometimes the culture gets in the way.
I would like
again.
to think that they build up a little bit lower each time you have one of those experiences.
I think so.
They don't go away,
yes.
but they're weakened.
They're weakened. They're definitely weakened. I think that's a great way of describing it, actually, because I certainly get the sense that the more and more I learn, and the more and more I realise that those differences are contrived, the less and less, certainly the less important they become.
Yeah.
So I think that building up a slightly not as high each time is a great analogy. So I would certainly, I think I could say to you that I personally, as a result of learning about how the universe and our planet and our life systems connect, and understanding that better and better, just a little better, not entirely, gives me an even greater sense of that unifying feeling than I had before. But I imagine what you're describing is certainly far more intense from a feeling, from an experiential point of view.
Yeah.
Whereas mine is probably very intellectual and some emotion.
Well, I'm never sure where thought ends and feeling begins, and the other way around either.
Yeah, perhaps it's not quite so black and white.
I don't know. What I know is the following, which, and I've read this and I've come across this a number of times of people reporting this same sensation, and it seems to be that one of the fingerprints of these substances is that feeling,
that unifying feeling.
And so that's where I want to say, no one feels like that in cocaine. No one feels like that in meth. No one feels like that in heroin. No one feels like that in speed or PCP or any of those other Schedule 1 drugs. And I'm going to say that maybe it is these drugs that create that unifying, that feeling of oneness, of connectedness.
Right.
And I think that those are the substances that should have special privileges.
Right.
And therefore should be treated a little bit differently than the other ones which we believe as a society are net negative. So, this sensation is a hallmark of these substances, and some of them do it stronger than other ones.
Right.
Let's now look at the mechanics of it. Let's look at addiction. Mm-hmm. Okay, the addictive capability of these, because if we want to make a logical, coherent argument for re-looking at these, we've got to kind of cover our bases.
Sure.
So the first thing I want to look at is addiction. You can't get addicted to LSD because it doesn't operate on dopamine. So forget that. So the government lied. Okay, they flat out, they lied, because they tried, first of all, in the 50s, they tried to say that LSD was addictive. Well, you cannot. You actually can't.
You can't, yeah.
You physically can't.
Yeah. You define addiction, you understand its mechanism, LSD does not produce
Exactly,
it.
okay.
I keep wanting to say LDS, and I know the Church of Mormon is not addictive, although maybe it is, but yes, LSD. I will, I'm going to say
Let's
LDS.
call it acid. Let's call it acid.
Fair enough.
So acid.
But so that's interesting. So it's definitely not addictive.
It's definitely not
by
addictive.
its very very nature and our understanding of what addiction is.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's about as addictive as socks. Like, you know, I mean,
yeah. It's a nonsense. It's a nonsense.
exactly. Now, what you may have is you may decide to become behaviorally attached to LSD. You may decide that you prefer the sensation that LSD gives you versus not having LSD, but that's not physically provoked.
Yeah.
And that would suggest that there's an
Like I prefer my shark socks over my non-shark socks.
Exactly. Now, if you found yourselves forcing, building your day around your shark socks, you know that
there might be a problem there.
There's something going on about shark socks here. I need to have a think about this. And likewise. But you're not going to become a heroin addict. You're not going to look. So someone who is taking a lot of LSD does not look like someone who's taking a lot of heroin.
Right.
No comparison whatsoever. MDMA or ecstasy. And again, when I'm talking about these substances, I'm talking about them in their pure clinical formats. I'm not talking about what would be available. Exactly, because God knows what's in them. In that. Sagan knows what's in that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Help us Hitchens. It's So LSD is not addictive.
Sure.
As far as I can tell, there's the stories that everybody hears about LSD are the stories that Bill Hicks famously talks about. Someone takes LSD, thinks they can fly, jumps out of a building, and as Bill Hicks said, well, why didn't they try and take off from the ground first of all? So I don't think we lost a moron there, or we didn't lose a cure for cancer. All of the cases of fatalities regarding LSD, where LSD was the only cause. I can't find any. I cannot find any stories anywhere on the internet where someone died directly because of LSD, other than hearsay and urban legend. But let's say that there's some truth in it. Mm-hmm. What appears to have happened is that the CIA were developing, or was it? Yeah, it was the CIA were developing LSD. The FBI did MDMA. The CIA were developing LSD during the height of the Cold War as a method to either get people to forget secrets they knew, so to avoid interrogation. Right. So if your spies got caught, they could take some LSD, and then while they were being interrogated, they would know nothing. Right. Or the other way around, as an interrogation
to loosen the tongue.
Exactly.
Right.
They also wanted to see what would happen if, for instance, a foreign diplomat was out and they just gave them a bit before they made a speech. So what they did was there was a program called MK Ultra, which is famous in tinfoil.
Yeah,
conspiracy
I'm going to be very skeptical here, and I'm going to ask you some questions.
Please
but in a moment, okay. you tell the story.
So the only MK Ultra. I mean, who names a project? You are just looking for trouble if you call it MK Ultra.
I'm ready to take off my shoe phone now and put it to my head.
I mean, it just says we've got aliens hidden in the Nevada desert. If MK Ultra doesn't tell you we've got aliens hidden in the Nevada desert, I don't know what does.
That's a pretty good name. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, why didn't they got Riding Hood or Pancake Tuesday? MK Ultra.
You know what? It's sorry. I think there's an episode of Stargate where there's a television show called Wormhole X,
right?
And there's certainly it's a very tongue-in-cheek episode. Yeah. And the characters decide to allow Wormhole X to proceed because it gives them plausible deniability. Gotcha, yeah. But they stop for a moment, and one of the lead characters, played by MacGyver, goes, "Why X?"
Yeah.
And the guy goes, "It's just a mysterious letter." And I hear this MK Ultra.
I know, it just...
Why? Because it's just Ultra. It speaks some mystery.
No one knows anything, exactly.
But
you want to know...
Of it. Is that advertising?
It just says we've got a massive secret and we're not telling you. It just says that.
So anyway, sorry, I digress. So,
exactly.
MK Ultra.
MK Ultra.
This is to do with diplomats.
Here's so CIA. Right. So it's LSD, and they're experimenting on it, and they wanted to find out what would happen if you gave somebody LSD and they didn't know you'd given them LSD. Mm-hmm. So they started doing things, and then here's the point. No one knows whether this is true. People purport to have proof of this. Right. There's the usual things. You see internet documentaries, and and I'm using that in exactly the level of credibility you should assign to it. Internet documentaries, right? Where anyone with an opinion can make something, like we are, right?
Too, yeah.
Okay. But then also they're also,
but this is real, people.
Free from corporate hegemony. So sometimes the truth is out there. So apparently this MK Ultra, so they basically identify people who, as they say, are less valuable members of American society, then top politicians, top business people, top scientists, top athletes, blah blah blah. So literally they go about suburbia spiking people's drinks with LSD. Apparently there's an infamous case of they put it randomly into a drinks machine in an office block. This was the reason for the two great stories I always heard growing up. Guy jumps out, thinks he's a bird, can jump out, jumps out of a window. Person thinks they're an orange, peels themselves. Right? Now,
that's interesting.
Now, I can imagine if we go back to never having taken LSD, and there was no reference to LSD in your culture. So literally this thing doesn't exist because this is the 50s. This is not the 60s. So the hippies haven't happened yet.
Right.
The Beatles haven't happened yet. John Lennon and Paul McCartney are in school.
Right.
Okay.
Presumably not taking
exactly.
LSD.
Everything looks like the first season of Mad Men. Okay. Okay. So there's no hippie stuff going on, and all of a sudden I'm on an LSD trip. I'm going to think I've gone insane.
Yeah.
Because the reality, the absolute inability to distinguish the reality that I experienced in the DMT, knowing I'd taken it, was the only thing that didn't make my... Because if I suddenly started seeing that stuff, not knowing I'd taken it, I'd be insane. I would be quite patently insane. I'm seeing stuff that seems as real to me as a desk, and it can't exist in reality.
It seems like I'm on a Stargate buzz here, but there's an episode about where they seem to accidentally open a visual element of a dimension that's occupying the same point in space and time, but different dimension, and so people are seeing these creatures that are kind of half there, half not, and they occupy the same point but not. And this comes from a number of different ideas in particular string theory that this might actually be there, but you're absolutely right. If you don't have a common frame of reference, of course, what was happening, of course, in this episode is people were going crazy and crashing planes and buses and whatever. And if you don't have that common frame of reference, that cultural impact and understanding, then I mean, it's that whole Arthur C. Clarke, a technologically advanced society will be invisible, indistinguishable from magicians.
Like I've always thought,
so we understand this.
How come chimpanzees don't hang out at our airports and just point to the fucking planes all the time?
Exactly.
They just don't see them.
Exactly.
So for all we know, there's aliens wandering around all the time.
Possibly.
And we just pass them off. I'm not saying there are.
Yeah, because we've gone now from MK Ultra to CIA spiking drinks to aliens and stargates.
But you brought up Arthur C. Clarke, and you can't bring up Arthur C. Clarke and apes
and
not have aliens, man. That's the rule.
I'm ready to play my timpani. So that's okay. So and you had said that there's no necessary proof of this, but how did you come across this information in relation to the CIA? Is this a kind of a verbal history?
No, I mean, like there's a lot of documentaries you can. I mean, like the internet is everything. I mean, it's like just go to the internet, go look up MK Ultra and LSD, and you'll just find stuff there. I don't know how credible these sources are. Okay, because no source goes, "I'm a lunatic. Here's my evidence." Right? Everyone speaks the same, and I'm wearing my skeptical hat because what I'm not going to say is this is proof of anything.
Right? Yeah, which you haven't.
But what I'm absolutely sure of is if I had no frame of reference for what a hallucinogenic was, and you gave me one without my knowledge, and I suddenly start to experience hallucinations, I think I've gone insane.
Yeah, and
quite patently. So I can see how I could think I'm a bird and fly out of plane. Because this
or try to escape and jump out. Yeah,
exactly.
I know. I can know just from personal experience. From last year, I underwent what's called a cascading panic attack, which was a particularly frightening thing.
Doesn't sound like fun.
No, it wasn't. And there were certainly times, and I'm completely lucid and not on any drugs of any kind, but there were times when I felt like I needed to peel my skin off. And as I said, I was sober and as clear-headed now.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I wasn't clear-headed. That, in fact, is part of the problem. But the fogginess in my head wasn't a chemical imbalance or anything.
Yeah.
It was, in fact, it was simple emotion plus adrenaline, and the two were pushing my thoughts beyond any kind of rational path.
Yeah.
And I was getting to the point where I was kind of feeling like I wouldn't quite say jump out the window, but I felt like I was completely trapped and I needed to get out.
You could see, was it a point you were so far into it that you could, with your lucid bit of your brain, you go, I can understand how if this keeps on going forward, I could jump out of a window.
Most certainly.
I'm not going to now,
Yeah.
but I can see how this path could get you there.
Most certainly.
Yeah.
I learned a huge amount about the power, and I don't want to say this in a kind of the power of the mind, levitation glasses, but in fact, the power of the mind and actually of emotions to completely alter. I don't want to say my perception of reality, but it coloured it. It coloured it as the right. And
well, you can say it can alter your perception of reality. It doesn't alter reality.
No,
it
exactly.
alters your perception of reality.
Yes, that's a very clear thing.
100% of your reality is your perception of it. So if I change, and this is it, if I change the soup that your neurons are floating in,
yes,
I can put stuff into your head or your heart. Yeah. That may or may not be real, but you can't tell the difference.
In fact, in speaking with a counsellor about this, because in my case, a panic attack, or in the case of anyone who has a panic attack, it's fear-based. And so he has this, or he uses the word fear as an acronym, false evidence appearing real. And certainly, and it's something I have to remind myself of many times, and certainly that's what it is. I create. In fact, it is confirmation bias, but in a very negative way. I choose this fact and that fact and that situation.
I upweight their veracity versus other conflicting.
And all of a sudden, it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
And so, what you just described there is absolutely how I felt. Like there was a teeny tiny part of me that was fascinated by the whole experience.
You're really watching.
Wow, but the other part going, I hate this. I want this to end. To the point where I don't want to say I would have been suicidal. It might be a bit strong, but certainly I felt. Again, had this gone any further, I was certainly in need of something else or someone else to try and pull me down, and then I eventually went and sought counselling, and that helped. But it was fascinating to me that my brain, through simple biochemistry and absolutely no other external biochemical factor, was able to produce this all on its own, all purely because of emotion and a series of events from my childhood all the way up, stacking on top of each other, and then external stimuli, and then the thought process spinning in a particular way.
Now this is fascinating.
I totally get then how with just the simplest of biochemical help. You could then move to the next step. I can totally. And if that's not a guided process, whereas I think if it's a guided process, you could, as you said, you could learn so much from it. I was watching. It might be not super old interview, but relatively old. It's an interview done by Dr. Peter Boghossian, who was spoken of about critical thinking and his book, A Manual for Creating Atheists, and he was interviewing Richard Dawkins, and he brings up the topic of he had heard on the grapevine or whatever that Richard Dawkins was considering his first trip. I think possibly an acid trip, but now I understand actually, because I was again there was a part of me watching this kind of going, I hope Richard is saying no to that, you know, but feeling uncomfortable listening to it, but trying to listen to it. And now on reflection, I believe he was probably talking about one of the
I'd imagine probably DMT, because it's so quick, because you can get in and get out very quickly. So Richard Dawkins was certainly saying it's something that he had never considered before, because no doubt, like us, he had been brought up in a culture, and the culture said no, and we don't always question everything. We are all drugs are in some way heroin, which is basically the underlying message. That is basically what it is. All drugs are in some way heroin,
except alcohol, because the
except alcohol and tobacco.
It's all right,
because that's okay. We sell you those ones, right? Even though they kill more than 500,000 people in America every single year combined.
Yeah, it is absolutely insane, and So I agree with you. I definitely want to do it. Or I should say, I definitely want to do it.
Yeah.
So it'll take me time to get there.
Because we're about halfway through now my treatise and stuff. So, as I said, I'm going to recommend that everybody who's listening to this tries it. What I will say is this: you don't try it on your own, and you try it with people who you trust, and preferably with people who you love. There's a saying in this called set and setting. Okay, which is basically where you take it and also how your mind is at the given time. So you do not take a psychedelic if you're on any other medication. You do not take a psychedelic if you've taken any other form of intoxicant whatsoever. You do not take a psychedelic if you are kind of very overly stressed or in a negative, very negative headspace. So exactly, right? And you do not take a psychedelic with someone who has never taken a psychedelic for the first time. Okay? Think of it like swimming, right?
Yeah.
You don't go out drunk off your ass and go, let's go, if you don't know how to swim, let's go both jump in the swim. Don't tell anyone where you're going, have a big feed beforehand,
completely dark lake.
Exactly. So I think if you take care of that, I think then you should be pretty much okay within reason. Like everything in life, there is no such thing as no risk. There are risks, but I'm going to go through them with you now. So let's look at the four again. So LSD. So LSD, it's not addictive.
Right.
Okay. And the next thing was the delusions, but I think we've safely dealt with that. You will know you are taking it. Never ever put it into somebody else's stuff and don't tell them. Yes. That should be a crime. That should be as much of a crime like attempting to murder somebody. Because to be at a point where reality no longer applies without informing someone that's an absolute
you've removed their choice of how to interact with the world.
In the 50s, the dude who set up AA, right? So the 12-step program, of which all addiction counselling now is based off of, is the 12-step programs. And AA has between a 5 to a 7% success rate.
Okay.
Or to put it another way, 93% failure rate.
Yeah, I actually am very surprised.
Let's just say that again.
93%
failure rate.
Failure. That is interesting. Okay. I would not had you no. I have no basis of.
This is based on 12 months now, by the way. So this is based on coming off alcohol and staying off alcohol for 12 months.
Wow. I would not have guessed that.
Neither would I. I would not have guessed that either.
Yeah,
I would have thought that we were up into the 50s, 20s.
It's interesting that the culture. It's I just assumed. It worked, and it worked most of the time, so that's interesting. But sorry, so okay.
No, it's good. And I'm trying to find the name of it, but there was a study done in the late 50s in Canada where they used LSD to treat alcoholics, chronic alcoholics. So these being alcoholics who'd been alcoholics for, I believe, more than 8 or 9 years. And the initial outset idea was to try and create a controlled version of the delirium tremens.
Okay.
Because frequently what happened is delirium tremens was the point at which people said, oh, this is my rock bottom, man. I can't go on like this any further. The problem with it was that when they came out of the delirium, they went, oh, well, I don't feel so bad now, so let's go on drinking.
Yeah.
So this is why 5 to 7%. So they thought that maybe LSD, acid, could help with this. In a controlled environment, we could create a delirium and see what happens. They got an awful lot more than they bargained for. What they found was that people reported past life review, where they were able to basically view their life as if it was happening again in front of them from a third-party perspective. So they were frequently able to go back and replay in vivid detail, but now with the body of their life experience, and examine old traumas. So they could be the child experiencing the beating or the neglect or the whatever, and they could see how these events then puppet mastered future behavior. And they were able to unpick this through conversation with the therapist. In all cases, this was done with the therapist being in the room.
In the room, right. So there's plenty of supervision.
Yeah. They did approximately 2,000, and 12 months later they had 45 to 50% success rate. So easily nearly 10 times what AA has. And then it was shut down because people went, this is crazy, it can't happen. The guy who set up AA, John something, having experienced an LSD trip, said, this is the cure for addiction. Okay? So that's LSD. Let's put that to one side. A clinical study... that's sorry, not a clinical study because it wasn't double blind, but a study in psychiatric circles that within 12 months of chronic alcoholism to no alcohol within 12 months, 45 to 50% success rate. AA, 5 to 7%. Okay? So A, from a scientific point of view, you would kind of go, well, that's a valuable tool. There's something that substance is doing that seems to address the underlying feelings of addiction. So that's LSD. Let's park that for a moment. Now let's look at ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is being taken by the indigenous tribes in South America. It is legendary in terms of it is the big daddy of psychedelics.
Right.
Okay,
This is not the toad licking thing, is
no,
it?
no.
Okay.
This is it's an ayahuasca ceremony, and it has an awful lot of religious and spiritual imagery and usage and language attached to it that I was very, very uncomfortable with.
Right.
When I started reading up about it, and I've basically just come to kind of go, okay, maybe that is maybe this is the most applicable language. Because there's been no scientific research for this.
Yeah.
Why don't we just use the language, but decide not to ascribe a divinity or a supernatural aspect?
Yeah.
So the first thing is this: the tribes call it medicine.
Right.
It's not called.
Yeah,
it's not
drug
called
or
a drug
recreation or
narcotic.
fun or whatever. It's called medicine.
Exactly. The word ayahuasca means vine of the souls in the native language, and this is kind of interesting. In order to make ayahuasca, because ayahuasca contains the natural form of DMT.
Right.
Okay, which we talked about earlier on, which is what I'd smoked. I'd smoked artificial DMT, which hadn't been prepared, which had been made in a lab. Mm-hmm. You can get DMT in high doses through ayahuasca. Right. The problem is this, as I mentioned, DMT is broken down by an enzyme in our stomach called MAO, monoamines oxidase. Right. Okay, which is naturally occurring because DMT occurs in our body, so our body has a way of getting rid of it in the same way that we've got ways of getting rid of adrenaline and testosterone. They're natural substances. We can punch them in or punch them out depending on how we need it. Right. So you couldn't eat DMT. Mm-hmm. It can't exist long enough to get into your bloodstream in your stomach. So the ayahuasca is made from the bark of a vine, and it's made from the leaves of a plant. Now, one of them has got the DMT in it. Right. And this other plant has got what's called an MAOI, a monoamino oxidase inhibitor. Ah, right. Which enables the DMT to sit in your stomach, be absorbed past through the liver and into it. Now,
Interesting.
Here's the crazy thing. How do they find this out? It's the rainforest. There's a lot of plants, right? Because here's the point.
I'm sure they have a lab.
Either plant on their own gives no indication that combined what it can do. Yeah. So it's not like you're sitting there chewing on the vine bark and you go, do you know what would go great with this? A few of those leaves, because I'm getting a bit of a buzz off it. Yeah. It's not. It's like eating lettuce or eating lettuce, but you put these two forms of lettuce together and you've got the craziest hallucinogenic ever on the planet as regards the human brain.
Well, I mean, I've often asked the question, who was the first person who went under the cow and said, I'm going to start drinking what comes out of these things? But I'm sure it...
And what were they thinking at the time? What
on earth were they thinking at the time? Were they thinking of inventing a cereal company? But so that's interesting. So yeah, how is there any indication?
No. What the tribes say is this, and this is where the old skeptometer pings a little bit. Okay, the plants told them. That's what they say.
I'm sure the plants did tell them, but possibly after.
But here's the point: there is no after. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because in order for them to have gotten there, do you know what I mean? Like, so let's just say random sampling. Yeah. I mean, I have no idea. Let's say that there was a Pete Doherty, Keith Richards type person who just in the tribes who just wants to be off their head all the time long. I mean, but that is so Western and that is so dismissive. Of the fact that this thing has been central to this culture, right? For thousands of years. And I'm not suggesting that their culture is more successful than ours or better than ours. I'm not making that suggestion. And anyway, I like the internet. I like shoes. I like central heating. But I'd also like to be not cutting down the rainforest and dumping oil into rivers and oceans
and not worried about people
and having 14-year-olds make my clothes at gunpoint. So I'm suggesting that there's maybe we don't have to be all of one or all of the other. There's some form of a continuum between living in harmony. And nearly at the mercy of nature, as these indigenous tribes would be, versus just beating the shit out of nature every chance we get. That when the chances are fuck the planet up or be nice to each other, we always choose fuck the planet up.
Absolutely. Well, nature shouldn't have been throwing all of those volcanoes and poisonous monkeys at us.
Exactly. Damn you, nature. So we have...
So the plants told them.
So they say the plants tell them.
Okay.
Now, they have found there's, and again, this is one of these stories that it's a great soundbite, and it's a great thing that people can say at parties, right? There was a Wall Street trader who was living a very stressed life, very, he was in the top 0.001%, right? Hears about ayahuasca, thinks, like the guy in The Wolf of Wall Street.
This is the guy from The Wolf of Wall Street.
This has got to be a bit of a buzz.
Yeah. Goes
down, has one of these experiences, and you have them in a ceremony. The ceremony lasts somewhere between, I believe, 6 to 8 hours. It's guided. It is essentially guided meditation while under the influence of this substance.
A spirit journey, as maybe Native Americans would call it.
It is all of that language. It is an inner journey, a spirit journey, a dream walk. It is an exploration of the soul. I've come up with a word for it, right? If microscope is the external examination of the very, very small, then psychedelics are microscopes. They enable you to look at yourself at a granular detail through introspection. They are a tool for peeling back what's driving you, what your basic motivations are. I have found my life has been positively transformed by these experiences in a way that I could just never have anticipated. Like I feel like I'm a different person, and I feel I'm actually a net better person than I was before these experiences.
Right.
So this guy goes down, has the ayahuasca ceremonies, and decides, I'm doing the wrong thing with my life. So he now sets up a retreat, and he treats chronic heroin addicts. And he has got something like an 80% success record. So you go down the 80%. 80%. Because what happens is that over the course of, you do, I believe, between 5 and 7 ayahuasca ceremonies, each lasting 4 to 8 hours. Now, I've never tried ayahuasca, but I'm imagining, because ayahuasca breaks down into DMT, there is a certain similarity between my experience and the ayahuasca experience. I know with smoked DMT, there's a sense of speed in terms of, you're not there for long.
Right.
So everything kind of moves and fast forward. I believe in ayahuasca, because there is a sensation you're there for hours, things are a bit more languid. And as I've heard people say, you can walk around inside there for a while.
Right.
As opposed to, you're just like nearly speed reading or speed shopping.
Yeah, trying to
try and take it all in, and there's just too much information. So 5 or 6 of these things, where for 4 to 8 hours your innermost thoughts are not revealed to you in a wishy-washy, you have a think about them. Like they're literally shown to you. It's like you're back there.
Right.
Like, if I imagine my DMT experience with 3 words that I needed to hear, and I cannot, and I know it's kind of because I'm not giving what those 3 words are, I cannot tell you enough how on the nose, like there was no subtext. These were precisely the 3 words I needed to hear. Precisely. There were no better 3 words that would have done.
Yeah.
This was precisely what I needed to hear. So I can only imagine what 8 hours with access to that personal subjective truth is.
Yeah.
And by truth I mean true for you, i.e., why do I do those things? Why do I know in my life I have been in situations where I have acted like I've been in a bad mood, that's fine, but there have been times when I've just been an asshole and I can't account for it.
Course,
I've just been an asshole.
You can't find a rationale for it.
But I'm just being an asshole, and even I know it. And it's not rudeness. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like being sharp with someone you love for no reason. For being less than in the moment kind of with them, and it's not because of you're distracted, because I can tell the difference between when I'm distracted by something and when I'm being an asshole. And sometimes I'm an asshole because I'm distracted, but other times I'm just an asshole, and there's no other way to explain it. And these substances appear to be able to unpick some of the reasons why we carry on like that. So everybody, other than a very small minority of people, from what I read, who become addicted for purely chemical reasons, i.e. there's a biochemical keyhole in their chemistry,
their system.
That narcotic just happens to plug in.
Perhaps a genetic predisposition or some sort of...
But most people, from my understanding, become addicted to something because of an underlying cause. Addiction is like a psychological scab. It is a sign of an injury that the individual happened, not a physical injury, but an injury nonetheless. We've all heard the language, they're trying to fill a hole in their life. the fact is that with a great psychiatrist over many times, you may get a glimpse of the underlying causes of these, the mother lode, the prime mover of these behaviors. With these substances, they come out, they introduce themselves to you, and you have a conversation with them.
Right.
Okay, as somebody described it as, you can spend all of your life in meditation trying to get a glimpse at what is going on inside you. And you may or you may not. But you take a psychedelic, something's going to happen.
Right.
Guaranteed.
Right.
This is what these substances do to our consciousness. So again, I'm not saying they reveal a new reality that exists. I'm saying they do something to our consciousness. And from my clumsy language, what they appear to do is they appear to enable the bit of me that is me interact with my subconscious in a way that is as real as I am in the present moment.
Our conversation as we're having it
So
today.
it becomes a three-dimensional physical space within which you can interact.
Which of course is the form that we are most familiar. It's why we have difficulty trying to understand very difficult concepts like virtual particles, or indeed particles, atomic particles. These are concepts most
Tangibility is everything to us.
Yes, absolutely. And so this seems to give a tangibility
it seems
to that.
And again, as I said, I have not taken ayahuasca. I'm extrapolating from my own experience with DMT, which was purely visual.
Right.
But it was as real as anything else I have seen.
Yeah.
And I cannot state that enough.
So the point you were making, and I know there's another one or another two to come.
I could talk about this for bleeding hours.
I think the point that you were highlighting here is that, at the very least, if nothing else, there is a massive scope for research into the properties of these
what is going
very different drugs that
there is
are
nothing like this
because of laws having. I tell you what, I become more and more skeptical about law. Not to say that I wish to abandon all law just yet, but there's a social engineer, Jack Fresco, who has this idea. I'm sure I can think of some counter examples, so I'm sure it's not true in all cases, but he thinks that a law is our failure to either provide a technical solution to a technical problem, or because we simply do not have the ability to solve a problem.
Like here's two things, specifically in Ireland.
Think this might be one of these examples.
Exactly. All right, and I'll use two examples. Actually, well, first of all, and this is, I only heard this 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this was one of the most startling realizations I'd ever had. We already have laws for bad behavior. But we don't need laws against drugs, because we have laws against bad behavior. Because here's the point: if I want to take DMT in my own house that I've paid for, and I'm paying my taxes as an adult, as a conscious adult, and it's not going to affect anyone, why aren't I allowed to? Now, if I go out and I punch someone, well, pick me up for punching somebody. I mean, by all means, punching somebody is not acceptable. If I get into a car and drive, well, I'm not capable of driving, so by all means, prosecute me for actions I take while under control.
Unsafe driving is, absolutely.
But to turn around and to say this substance that occurs naturally, the possession of that is in and of itself an illegal act. It is undermining the state, is completely wrong. Now, and this is where you start to get into conspiracy theory, but I cannot...
Where's my tinfoil hat?
No, I'm wearing 2 of them. Your thoughts are available for them, mate. They're not getting mine, right? You can't help but notice the following pattern. The 4 substances I talk about, LSD, MDMA, DMT, and psilocybin, create this sensation of oneness. There is very little evidence of any harm or addictive damage, and yet they're classed the same as heroin.
Right.
Okay?
Which we know is
crazy bad for you, like just crazy. But morphine has a clinical use. Okay? Like we know that morphine has a use. Heroin, not so much. Because basically what heroin is this kind of amped up morphine is my understanding of what it is. It was opium, and morphine is the naturally occurring substance. You do something to it, and you get heroin. But that's something that doesn't happen in nature. Right?
So it's basically definitely something not built for our bodies and our brains. So,
whereas DMT occurs in nature. LSD is very, very close to serotonin. Like it's apparently it's 2 I've heard them called 2 trivial chemical steps away from becoming serotonin. It's basically it's a methyl of serotonin. I don't even know what that means, but apparently that's what it is. You've got MDMA, which is a completely artificial substance, but it's based off sassafras, so it has got its basis in some sort of plant oil, and then psilocybin. Well, that's just mushrooms, and we all know that. If you consider that governments treat these 4 substances the same as heroin, and these 4 substances create a consciousness that you cannot find anywhere else, then you cannot but arrive at the inescapable conclusion that the government are outlawing that form of consciousness. Because to take the purpose of a system is what it does. By making these 4 substances that are the only 4 we are aware of that do this, right? And there's a couple of them, CTB and stuff, but they're all
very
based on the same thing. But they create an hallucinogenic, a psychedelic experience.
Right.
They don't appear to cause physical harm or addiction or societal problems, yet we class them the same as heroin. You're not left with much room to maneuver other than the governments don't want you to feel that.
Yeah, which is...
They're happy for you to feel like alcohol and tobacco. They don't mind you feeling that, which is an awful... anxious.
There's stress drugs. I mean,
Exactly.
I from understanding my experience with people who use them. I mean, they're used to de-stress from stress situations, and of course they don't really. I mean, it's not even they don't provide a de-stress. They just. I mean, they're like a painkiller to a certain extent. They just block the fact that there is an actual problem, and there are more underlying problems.
Well, let us take that. Let us take at one end of the spectrum heroin, mainlined into like the worst image we can ever possibly imagine, or someone smoking a crack pipe like from Breaking Bad or something like that, like methamphetamine. So a very fast-acting drug that punches you out of reality, but seems to leave you in yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, so what it does, it leaves the body there, but it retreats. The consciousness recedes inside the body. And let's take the strongest psychedelic, DMT. Well, what DMT does, it blows your consciousness out of your body. That's the sensation you feel. Is your consciousness is liberated from your body and joins up with all the other consciousnesses. Right. So whereas in one narcotic aspect makes you feel isolated, a beautiful, splendid, medicated opiate isolation. The other one is like a dog coming back into a pack that has missed him. If you can, that's the sensation of feeling oneness with other people is very joyous.
Right.
And actually, as I'm thinking about it, it's like if you've seen those videos of soldiers coming home to their dogs. And the dog's reaction. Well, you're the soldier and everyone else's consciousness is the dogs. No one seems to come back and go, I joined with the consciousness, but none of them would talk to me. It was all like, I showed up and it was the highlight of their universe. You know, I mean, it's quite a welcoming sensation you're getting here. So a couple of studies have been done on this. MDMA, ecstasy, was originally called empathy. It was discovered by mistake by some pharmacy guy. In taking it, they realized the effects it was used in psychiatry very, very effectively. It's considered, someone described it as 10 years worth of therapy in 6 hours. Because what MDMA, the chemical reaction that MDMA does, serotonin is our feel-good drug, it's a neurotransmitter. And what happens is all of our nerves have a battery of serotonin. Right? So let's say a supply for when the serotonin runs out. What MDMA does is it causes the first neuron it encounters to dump its entire serotonin load into the space. Right? In between it and the next neuron. Then it stops that excess serotonin being absorbed back in again, so the battery doesn't get charged back up. That serotonin causes every other neuron that it encounters to dump its serotonin. So the first time you take MDMA, every bit of serotonin you have stored up in yourself is sloshing around inside your brain.
So you start feeling
it feels rather good. That's why they call it ecstasy. That is an exact description. I've heard it described this. Imagine winning £100 million.
Right.
Now imagine being in a room with everyone else, and they've also won £100 million.
Oh, this sounds like a natural law economy to me.
Right? So this is a phenomenal drug.
Right.
Phenomenal drug. Again, the US government outlawed it against, the DEA, should I say, outlawed it in 1984 and 1985 against their own lawyers. Their own lawyers said it should be scheduled as a Schedule 2 or a Schedule 3 because it had obvious medicinal benefits.
Right.
It was being used to counsel people with terminal cancer.
Right.
It was being used for people who were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. It was used for couples who were weren't on speaking, like had gone beyond the point where they were no longer speaking, they were breaking up and stuff like that, and also for people approaching that. So many psychiatric uses and psychological kind of uses, and against their own lawyers, the DEA said, no, this is a Schedule 1 drug, therefore it can't even be studied. So it's decisions like this by the DEA, right, that make you kind of believe they just don't want us feeling like that. And again, I know that sounds ludicrous, but I have tried to reason this out and find another reason. When the science says it is not addictive, it is not harmful, you are only left as a reason to ban it for what it does.
For what it does, yeah. And it goes back to a cultural question
Exactly.
rather than a, well, I mean, and of course we did discuss this in detail in our last podcast about trying to move more towards an evidence-based political and economic system rather than a cultural or opinion-based one. And this has, and there are many reasons why we should do that, and many cases that come up again and again, kind of going, but this doesn't work. And sometimes things change. Things like gay rights and civil rights previously, where it's obviously these people aren't stupid or whatever, and it's obviously these people should be entitled to the same rights. Why aren't we? So the culture does change, but
have you noticed?
But we seem to make, as I said before, we seem to make the same mistake again and again. And this one is certainly one I was aware of, despite my own cultural drugs are bad, drugs are evil, don't do drugs, don't go near drugs. There was the logical part of me who was kind of going, but I know that there's evidence out there that there are certain drugs that are nowhere near as bad as alcohol and tobacco, and they're for sale. Why are we not even talking about these?
Well, and again, we have...
And so you are right. I mean, the evidence is in, and the evidence has been in. The jury's not out on this one. The jury has been in on this for a very long time.
Absolutely. And some drugs are just not guilty. They're just not guilty. They need to be set free straight away. Let us take... And I think we can look on this... You can look at the following story I'm going to tell you as either, well, sure, that's just the way the world works, or
I'm not a fan of that.
Exactly, or assuming that the people who make decisions aren't stupid people.
Yes. Then
you begin to see a sinister side to this. David Knott was the advisor in Tony Blair's government for health.
Right.
Okay. He's not like the minister for health, but like the head doctor. Right. Let's call it that way. Right. And he put together a schedule of available drugs, both legal and illegal, and he rated them in terms of how dangerous they were to society. And he looked at the common things. He looked at like what damage they do, how addictive are they, damage to society, etc., etc., etc. And he rated them from 1 to 20. And number 1, I think, is heroin. I think number 2 is nicotine. Right. I think number 3 is cocaine, and I think number 4 is alcohol.
Right.
Cannabis,
2 of which
LSD,
we have,
psilocybin. These were all way down, including. And the famous soundbite was: "It is statistically more dangerous to go horse riding than it is to take an ecstasy tablet."
Oh, so I remember this. This
was street ecstasy. So he's not even saying MDMA. He is saying street ecstasy,
which could have anything.
Which could have rat poison in it. It could have heroin in it, for God's sake. Who would put heroin inside a chip? Well, who knows? It's like, I've hid my diamond inside your burger. It makes no financial sense whatsoever, right? He was fired within 48 hours of... So here was a doctor who had looked at the medical research.
Yeah, and spoke the truth.
Spoke
the evidentiary based truth. Yeah.
Now, so you add that on top of one thing that, again, these 4 substances, LSD, magic mushrooms or psilocybin, MDMA and THC in cannabis have in common, is that you're not really up for drinking an awful lot of alcohol when you're having them.
Yeah, and probably not smoking tobacco
exactly.
too much.
Before MDMA was made illegal in America, there was bars in Texas where it was still legal and it was being manufactured legally that used to have ecstasy nights, X nights.
Right.
And they all reported that they made a ton of money on... They were selling pills.
Yeah.
They didn't really sell that much booze.
Yeah.
Because it's a different sensation. Because you don't connect with someone. You can have a laugh with someone on alcohol.
Yeah.
But I have never, and I would have started drinking in my mid to late teens. I would still drink once a week. I would have like a couple of cans. I mean, not heavy or anything like that, but like a couple of cans. So I would be very familiar.
Yeah.
I have had amazing nights on alcohol. I have had awful nights on alcohol, and mostly it's just nice.
Yeah.
I now like the taste.
Yeah.
I've now killed enough of my taste buds that actually I like a beer. I like a nice low alcohol beer because I like the taste, but I don't want to lose control to alcohol.
Yes.
But I love getting stoned off my ass.
Yeah.
Right? And just talking. Mm-hmm. And just talking. And it is this sense, this shared sense. It's like a campfire. It creates a campfire thing. It creates an intimacy. It creates an atmosphere where sharing is conducive to sharing, but also sharing is rewarded.
Yeah.
Okay? People don't start fights when they're stoned, all that type of stuff. So you come to a conclusion, because unless someone else can come up with a better reason, why are these substances treated this way? It is a prohibition on that form of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And Graham Hancock, who's an author, who was the person who said the thing, like, we already have laws for bad behaviour. We don't need laws for drugs.
Right, yeah.
Because we penalise bad behaviour. And if no drug has been able to come up with a new bad behaviour, that there isn't an existing law there for.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I'm not my older brother has this idea that he doesn't generally subscribe to conspiracy theories, in particular the Illuminati type 5 families ruling the world, and his explanation, and it's the same reason why he wouldn't go with the whole Bush government
9/11
and it's very simply this: we're just not that organised. And I agree with that. So while I seriously doubt the amount of thought and attention that you or other people who put into this, it's highly unlikely that was the original reason.
Exactly.
But certainly the lack of willingness to do that now, coupled with vested interests, creates a culture, and that culture is being perpetuated. And it was passed on to me.
And
our generation is like, oh, we can't vote and allow drugs be used. You know why? Just because we can't. You know.
Yeah.
So I would say there's element of truth in that. But as with many things in life, I'd say it is complex. But I don't think the answer is complex. I think the answer is actually quite simple.
And I think drugs as well, and drugs legislation, has been used throughout history to target subgroups that the government wants to demonize.
Mm-hmm.
The entire illegality of cannabis over in America appears to be, and it's not down to Randolph Hearst from what I can see, but it does appear to be scapegoating Mexicans.
Right.
That basically that smoking marijuana was very, very popular. It was part of Mexican culture because it wasn't a big deal, because it could grow bloody everywhere like a nettle. You know, it's like us chewing dock leaves. Do you know what I mean? It makes no difference. I mean, it's a lot better than dock leaves. And this was a quick way to basically highlight and demonize and ostracize Mexican culture. Likewise, opium with Chinese, kind of with the immigrants building the walls. So you get to get a feeling for it. MDMA, I'm actually not so sure. MDMA, I think, was made because the lab evidence that America brought out to justify the addictive properties of MDMA was proven to be based on bad science, because the scientist came forward with a study and says, I've done this study where I've administered MDMA to people, and even after one use we can see the beginnings of holes in the brain. So literally MDMA was, it will eat your brain away.
Right.
Like literally eat your brain. Here's the MRI scans. It then turns out actually that wasn't MDMA the guy had given them, it was methamphetamine. Now, what scientist worth do you know what I mean? Like, you have to be stupid a few times in exactly the same way to, over a clinical trial, give only the non-control group the wrong drug over and over
again. Well, I mean, I'm thinking now of an episode of Cosmos. I just recently rewatched the new Cosmos, which I'm going to keep on plugging. Absolutely fantastic series.
Yes, you can't.
With
watch
Neil
new Cosmos.
deGrasse Tyson, and this particular episode was about a guy whose name I've completely forgotten, and I shouldn't. But he was a scientist who ultimately got rid of lead from our petrol
Yes.
and from the
And they
world.
faked their results.
Yeah, and because he had been working so hard
Yeah.
and he'd been following the evidence again
Yes.
and again and again, but had, in opposition to him, a reputable scientist of 20 years
Yes.
saying lead is not a problem, lead
Yeah.
is not building up, and he was obviously wrong, but
My
he was also obviously vested.
And here's the point: I cannot, and actually, I have this troubles me. A day doesn't go by where this troubles me. Where this doesn't trouble me, should I say? In a situation like that, right? How can a human do that? How can you deliberately lie
knowing the consequence.
to achieve a negative consequence?
Yeah.
When I just don't understand.
It's a very, very. I mean, again,
you have to be a scumbag. Like, I'm sorry, but there is no way, because prudence in and of itself, Jesus, the Hippocratic Oath even in and of itself,
yeah.
which would be like, does it look like there might be some evidence for lead?
Yeah.
Is it like, I don't get climate change deniers.
Yeah.
I don't get why they just go, no, and this whole new thing, we're going to roll coal and stuff. It's like obviously, and I know why it's to do with religious things, because they think Jesus is going to be back in 50 years, and so why bother looking at
Well, there's another belief-based part of this anyway, that we just don't need to worry. Well, not that we don't need to worry about it, because Jesus will
literally take care of it. Jesus will clean the oceans. Anyway, So we have, we've got MDMA now has been used extremely successfully in the cure, again, of incurable post-traumatic stress disorder. This is veterans coming back from the current conflicts that the American Army are involved in, or perpetrating, or causing, or whatever language you want to use. And these are people who have untreatable PTSD, so they haven't responded to therapy, they haven't responded to medication, they're essentially dysfunctional, they'll have lost family, support structures, jobs, blah, blah, blah. The worst possible thing you could imagine. And again, they're having remarkable results. Successes after 1 to 2 to 3 sessions, where you go from, after one session, and I don't know the numbers of people involved, but this was a course done by a guy called Rick Doblin, and we'll put a link up about this guy. One session with MDMA and the therapist, 65% success record, going up to high 80s after 2 sessions. These were people who science had nothing to bring to bear on them. Right. It was like, we're sorry guys, all we can do now is just anesthetize you against the symptoms. We have no idea. Here be whales. We've got nothing. And you use MDMA in a clinical setting where it is used as along with therapy, with word therapy, and it's able to cure 2/3 of them after one session. Now again, we come back to, because what these substances appear to be able to do, and extrapolating from my own experience, is they give you an ability to look at your life, your thoughts, your decisions, your actions in a ego-free way. Yeah, which of course that constantly gets in our way from analysing anything. And this, my own experience of therapy in the last year. I mean, this is what therapy has been in my sessions. It's me looking at my life at a particular point to see if I always, because I'm a computer scientist at the moment and a programmer, I understand, it's easy for me to understand things as there are lots of little desktop services running in my brain. The question is, what spooled them off? What kicked them off? And what do they do? And what do they do when they interact? And is that generally skillful or unskillful, depending on what it is I'm trying to achieve? But my ego does always get in the way, and I have to try and keep it in check in order to be as clear-minded as I can when analysing these. So I could imagine that being free of that would certainly help that process on faster. So, or even just be more clear about it, whereas it's taken a lot of reflection of the first session that I had over a year ago and thinking about it a few months ago, kind of go, oh, actually, that's really what was happening there. So I completely agree. And again, we're down to evidence decision, or evidence-based science here, evidence-based medicine, and evidence-based policy making. Yes, which we stumble on every now and again. It's not, our system is not based, our political and economic system and our decision-making system is not based on evidence. And as a result,
sometimes we get the right answer. I mean, as I've said, as Peter Boghossian said, the problem with faith is it is an unreliable epistemology.
Yes,
at its best, it's unreliable. And so if you want to put governments and their policies in relation to drugs in the best possible light, they're just half right, half wrong by chance. But in the worst possible light, there are definite reasons why we've gone down this path and why we're not really being encouraged to consider others. So I think the cure is free thought.
Yeah.
If the disease is faith, in this case, faith that policies can just be right just because a couple of old fat white men have decided to make them. Then the cure for that is actually reason and evidence and free thinking. So excellent. I have learned so much.
One more.
Have we done
on time?
I think we have time for one more. Yeah.
One more. So the last one is going to be the one that most people are going to be familiar with, which is cannabis, which is THC. Now this was news to me, okay? The human brain, and in fact the brains of, I believe, I haven't been able to get a definitive answer, but it appears to me to be all mammals have a system of, actually I don't know what they are, but it's called the endocannabinoid system within the brain. So this is a system of, I don't even know what it does, but I know it's linked into the dopamine system in some way, shape or form. And it is activated by cannabinoids. Okay, so there are, as I do comedy, and so like I have a story where I talk about there are little cannabis-shaped keyholes in our brain, and only cannabis opens those keyholes. Okay. The cannabis or the cannabinoids that we manufacture ourselves, because our brain manufactures cannabinoids, or the exact same chemical that we find inside of a plant.
I didn't know this, but yes.
Neither did I. And when you hear stuff like that, and you realise it's in all mammals, and you think it's nearly like we're supposed to open those locks. It's nearly like we're supposed to plug that thing in and see what kind of happens. And
this sounds like a sex talk I had once, but
exactly.
Anyway.
so you kind of go, and then you look at like cannabis. Cannabis would be the most addictive of the four substances I've talked about.
Right.
Because I mean LSD isn't
addictive at all.
Psilocybin doesn't appear to be addictive. There's so little research done on it, but all of it appears to be really, really positive. Right. Here's a little thing. Psilocybin has a nice little safety thing taken into it, right? So if you eat a handful of mushrooms, what it does is, while the psilocybin is active, it elevates your psilocybin resistance. So even if you try and... It's very hard to overdose on psilocybin. The more you take, the more immune to it you become, and then that drops back down very quickly, so you can then go back to square one and start all over again. But during an actual trip, it appears that it has a built-in safety mechanism. Now, I'm sure science could get around
intelligent
that
design,
and
I think.
Exactly, right.
But anyway, from the drug god, of course.
And Johns Hopkins released a study, I believe, earlier on this year, saying that even giving psilocybin to people results in up to 5-year long, like one single dose of it can result in a 5-year long, a permanent, more positive outlook on life, is, I believe, the phraseology they used. Right. So they got people to rate how happy they were with life. They gave them some psilocybin, and then they've been following up with them. And people are saying that people report, and this is self-reporting. So we don't have a needle telling us what it is. Yeah. But at some point, if enough people say the same stuff, you can't just dismiss it out of hand. You got to say, well, there's something going on.
There's something going on. Yeah.
Large numbers of people report that psychedelic experiences are their most formative experience in their life.
Right.
It is fundamentally life-changing. An experiment was done in the 60s called the Good Friday experiment, where they took ordained pastors, and they had two groups, and it was a double-blind test. And what they did was they gave them a dose of psilocybin, and they gave the other group a dose of like a caffeine pill to get them a bit amped up.
Yeah.
Right. And then what they did was they asked them to talk about it, and everybody who had the psilocybin talked about transcendental in nature and Jesus and wow and fantastic and everything, and the other people went, well, whatever, some yes, some no. They then followed back up with both groups 20 years later. Most of them are all still ministers. Mm-hmm. The group who hadn't been given the psilocybin, they said that what characterised that group is most of them couldn't remember the experiment.
Right.
It was just another day in their life. For the people who were given the psilocybin, many of them reported this was A, a profound moment for them in their life, and B, exactly identical to any subsequent moments of what they would have called religious mysticism or transcendence they experienced. Mm-hmm. They could not tell the difference between what guided meditation and deep thought and thinking and fasting and the altered consciousness state that brought them through, and what psilocybin brought them through.
Yeah.
Now when you add in, you go look at some old pictures of Adam and Eve, and in a lot of them they're standing by a big mushroom tree. Right. And then when you say you shall not eat of the tree of knowledge, because the first commandment of God is you're man and you're woman and don't do that.
Yeah.
And the underlying fingerprint of all of these substances is a unifying experience, that we are not different, we are all made of the same stuff, is completely anathema to the religious message.
So are you suggesting that perhaps religions or churches were the first DEAs?
There's a book apparently called The Mushroom and the Cross, or The Cross and the Mushroom, and I'm going to get you a link for it, which talks about the fact that that early Christianity may have in fact been a mystery mushroom cult. Interesting. That's very interesting.
Cannabis. Okay.
In this country, cannabis is illegal and has been for a number of years. We're just about to have a situation where the government is about to legalise a specific treatment, Sativex. Sativex gets its name from the two types of cannabis plants that are grown, either the sativa plant or the indica plant. And Sativex is a treatment for MS and some MS symptoms.
Right.
So for a start, we now know that there's a medicinal use of cannabis.
Yeah.
So
this is the government.
As soon as that happens, it should no longer be Schedule 1. And this is just one of them.
Yeah.
THC is a very, very interesting, is an interesting compound, and that's the one that gets you stoned or high in cannabis. But there's another one called CBD, which stands for something.
Right.
Cannabinoid. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a very long word. Okay. CBD apparently is the base chemical for all anticonvulsives, and apparently is an incredibly effective anticonvulsive. Now, unfortunately, over time, the strains of cannabis available today have been bred to maximize the THC and by proxy reduce the CBD.
Right.
But science can do anything, right?
Yeah.
If we decriminalize this stuff, we can just get that stuff back up again through selective breedings and genetics and stuff like this.
Yeah.
So again, another absolutely cast iron example of cannabis having medicinal use. So that's kind of it.
Yeah.
It's like there is no reason for these substances to be treated
like heroin. I mean,
like heroin.
At the very least, that's what the evidence is showing, that these are not the same thing. So yeah, I mean, there certainly should be questions asked about why they were treated the same, but at least.
Let's forget why. Let's forget apportioning blame.
Let's go dealing with the here and now and moving forward. There's no reason.
The data's in. Yeah. Society was wrong.
Yeah.
There are uses for this.
Change.
I am not suggesting that people go out and take these things willy-nilly or anything like this, because, as I said, these things, set and setting is incredibly important. These are not party drugs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know ecstasy is used as a party drug. I am not advocating that use. I'm not denying that it can't be used like that. But there are clinical uses for this stuff.
Yeah.
And what's happening is that it's not like you can't get these drugs.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you can't get your hands on them.
Yeah.
But scientists can't get their hands on them to use them, to experiment with them, to investigate them, to kind of see what's going on.
Yeah.
But yet anyone else can get their hands on them with no quality control, no nothing, and nasty shit.
I think there's definitely. I mean, you've inspired me to research a whole lot more into this. I'm fascinated by many of these.
What would be lovely would be maybe in a couple of months' time we come back and you say, right, this is what I've learned, because maybe you might go through and go, actually, Rob, I think you're wrong.
Yeah.
And let's discuss it again.
I would love to do that. Yeah. I'd love to do that. Because already now you've raised a number of things that I mean, so much I didn't know, but I think many things I thought I knew, and kind of going, oh, okay, and then no doubt there are some things I kind of want to look up a little further that I want to see for myself.
Yeah.
So the doubting Thomas in me.
Well, no, but isn't this the whole difference, Kieran? Is that I can turn and go, here's my sources.
Yeah,
go
absolutely,
look.
and go look and convince yourself.
And here's the point, because I just want to be right.
Yeah.
So I don't mind. But I don't mean right now.
No.
I mean right in general.
Yeah.
So if there's a flaw in my thinking, by all means, point
it out and let you know. Well, I'm definitely going to have a look at that. I know we have talked about having our Good Friday drink-a-thon with Doubting Thomas and Judas.
Yeah.
We may at some point have to do a YouTube version, and we may look at some. We definitely should look at the drugs with Bunny Rabbit Ears conversation again. I think there's an awful lot more in it, and there's an awful lot more to discuss. But thanks very much, Robert, for looking into that. After this now, we're going to actually have I discovered a new artist, and by discovered I mean I was on Reddit and someone had posted the link and I clicked on it and I said I like that. So I didn't discover him, but his name is Graydon Squared. Yes. Graydon Square. Sometimes I've seen Graydon Squared written down. And he's a rap artist based in LA. Mm-hmm. He has a fascinating personal history. But he didn't start off rapping about atheism. But now many of his songs have an atheistic or scientific or mathematical subject to them. And I'm a student of, I say I'm a student of music. I am a student of music, but a very narrow form of music, classical music. Very beautiful and very interesting, but only one of many. And so I was never that interested in rap. There was nothing in rap that I was able to connect to or relate to, and there are many people who were, but I've always been fascinated by it.
I have found, if you just interrupt, what I've found is that like rap music, when I hear it, it's like, yeah, I like it, but it doesn't move me. Yeah, it doesn't move me like other forms of music. I mean, I would put kind of rap to me is like jazz, or like classical. It's something that I know I want to get more into, but I haven't found any initial doors that kind of go, that one really moves me, really speaks to me. I can appreciate it, but it's, it just doesn't make me feel.
Exactly.
And I like music that makes me feel.
Definitely. And that would be the same experience that I've had with rap. I listened to 3 of this guy of Graydon Square's tracks one morning a few weeks ago. All 3 of them I loved. That hasn't happened to me in a long time with any music artist. And I don't say bowled over almost seems condescending, but I'm bowled over by the intellectual weight of his lyrics, and yet they're not passed off as intellectualism. He has made it accessible. He's made it work brilliantly. It's not a faux rap. This is someone who's actually gone through the same experiences that many rap artists have. But his conclusion at the end of this path, or where he is at this point on his path, is very, very different to any other that I've heard. Right. And yet the result is, I think, excellent. But I'd love to hear what other people think. So this track is Graydon Square, Stockholm Syndrome.
Your holy books inspire hate, despair, and drama. If your God does love you, I hope you make him wear a condom. People think with prayer they're safe in the streets. Frederick Douglass didn't become free till he prayed with his feet. You can tell the hell in God are man-made. They both want to question authority and demand slaves. And any incarnation of slavery's not good. So from here we can deduce Stockholm Syndrome is not hood. But it gets deeper than this, especially when people get pissed. When you point out their deity's nature and even intent. But I'll never worship anything with evil in it, especially something who allows evil to even exist. I don't give a shit if he created me. That don't give him the right to commit genocide with pride and act crazily. His abused and neglected claim is crooked biz. If this was Cali, DCFS would've came and took his kids. Belief is so important that if you don't, you go to hell. Without the type of proof you need in court to avoid a jail. Give me the gas can and send me. I don't need the draws, all because I can't fathom how your God doesn't need a cause.
About you, but this looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners. Even defend the tactics that are used to imprison them.
You're a conquered mind, trying to conquer other minds, selling.
Come out here all about you, but this looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners. Even defend the tactics that are used to imprison them.
Another conquered mind, trying to conquer other minds, please.
Come and hear our truth.
Religious freedom is an oxymoron. None of them books scare me, not the Bible, not the Quran. This is to Islam, and it's fundamentalism. The day you release your women, I'll quit releasing venom. Until then, no amount of of scientific contributions could ever excuse your hateful chauvinistic institution. But here's the real reason I'm not a Muslim. Children, see your anointed prophet used to fuck them. Listen, Muhammad was taking children as wives. One he married at 6 and consummated at 9. He was somewhere in his 50s trying to get in them draws. She wasn't even 10 yet, still playing with dolls. So they try to hit me with the older times were different, rationalizing atrocities. Now you sound like Christians. I charge the views on women as sickening. Either update the culture or just fade into history. But either way,
this looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners. Even defend the tactics that are used to imprison them.
a conquered mind, trying to conquer other minds, selling.
Come out here on you, but this looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners. Even defend the tactics that are used to imprison them.
For conquered minds, trying to conquer other minds, a challenge.
Come out here on you, but this looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners. Even defend the tactics that are used to imprison them.
For conquered minds, trying to conquer other minds, selling.
Come out here on you, but this looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners. Even defend the tactics that are used to imprison them.
For conquered minds, trying to conquer other minds, a challenge.
Come in here on truth.
When it comes to speak about women in Islam, now I am free. But I cannot forget my niece. She was forced to marry her cousin when she was 10. He was over 40. Her marriage was valid and legalized under the Islamic Sharia because Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, married his second wife when she was 6. He was over 50.